you referenced obviously the illicit market. It's not, they don't have to follow the same processes and meet the same compliance. They have an inbuilt advantage, which in a sense that that their costs are lower and their compliance is lower.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Harmonia Podcast. We are joined here today by the lovely Mike Morgan Giles. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Bertha.
How are you doing today?
Yeah, well, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
No, thank you so much for coming on. Mike is the CEO of the Cannabis Industry Council and is going to talk about the future of medical cannabis here in the UK. But before we get into that, I'm going to hand over to Mike to do a bit more of a formal introduction. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Bertha. So yeah, I've been CEO of the Cannabis Industry Council for about 2 years now. The council's actually about 3 years old itself, and the council was created to sort of create a unifying voice for the industry, to where we can collaborate, where we can try and advocate for change in the industry with policymakers, with regulators, and to prepare reports and run events that can help move the industry forward, as well as obviously providing a range of member benefits. My background is in membership organisations and charities mainly. I've worked in the energy sector, the water sector, local government, and I'm also an elected district councillor as well.
Thanks, Mike. And you mentioned a variety of different things there, but I suppose where I always like to start with people is what sort of inspired you to join the medical cannabis industry here in the UK. You jumped around from a variety of different sectors, and you're not necessarily a patient. So I know a lot of the times the majority of people that do invest themselves into the industry is because they've got that sort of lived experience, and you're coming at it from a very different angle. So it's always very interesting to understand when an outsider, well, you're not necessarily the outsider, yeah, but you know what I mean, is very interested in treating patients with medical cannabis.
Yeah, I suppose if you look back at my career, so I mentioned, the energy sector and the water sector as just two examples. I didn't have a connection to those industries either, and I've always thought that, you can learn and understand the policy fairly quickly, and then it's just applying your existing skills. So cannabis might be somewhat more unique than other industries, but that is more of maybe a cannabis industry thing rather than how the world of work works, if you see what I mean. But my interest though does go back though. So when I was at university, quite a long time ago now, I wrote my dissertation on drug law reform. My views haven't changed since then, and so I've always maintained an interest in what's happening in this space, and the role looked interesting when it was being advertised a couple of years ago. So I put myself forward.
Yeah, so it's actually so in a way, it's definitely an area of interest for you then. If it's something that you already used to do previously. But in terms of the Cannabis Industry Council, then, what are the kind of changes that we'd like to see in the horizon, or that we're likely to see in the horizon? Because I know there's so many exciting different changes, but there's also a lot of challenges within just the sector itself. And what kind of work are you guys doing moving forwards? I guess this is your opportunity to just go for it. I'm handing over.
Yeah, well, the two things that were already in the pipeline, and this is with the government already, is one is on the hemp side. The previous government announced earlier this year they would liberalise the hemp farming regime, and they also asked the Advisory Council on Misuse of Drugs to look at THC limits, and I believe the ACMD were given until October, November to provide their feedback, and if that percentage does increase in line with other European countries, then that would obviously make us more competitive. It would help farmers because often when they're growing the crop, it can just go slightly over the existing limit because of the weather, not because of anything else. So if that regime can then come into place, that will certainly help. It also has other changes like allowing farmers to apply for licenses in advance. Before, they were often doing it midway through a growing season, and it also allows them to hold the license for longer. So that's one bit of good news that came out this year. That as I say, the remaining bit is what will the ACMD say on the THC limits. And the other thing that the government's been consulting on, again with the ACMD, actually they've been having a back and forth, is on, and this is now on the prescription side around research and development. And they've got this bit of work called Barriers to Research, and they're consulting. They were sort of, the ACMD put a paper out there, and the government is due to respond to that at some point. So we intend to feed back to the government on what our position is on that. But the government, again, this was the previous government who initiated this, said they were committed to reducing barriers and making it easier to do research on, scheduled drugs. So that we hope will then make it easier for universities and institutes and industry and others to do the research required to undertake clinical trials, and to help bring more products to market and just make it easier to get that knowledge and evidence base that we all want to help build out the industry so that more people getting prescriptions for their conditions, basically. So those are two things that are happening that obviously we're involved with. I mean, in terms of moving forward, well, there's obviously a new government that's been in place for not too long now. They've got a whole new ministerial team. Half the MPs are new, so we're sort of digesting that. I mean, what I think though is the important thing for the industry is to link our objectives with the government. So whether that's saying that hemp can help with house building and climate change, or whether it's saying that prescription cannabis can help with bringing down waiting lists as well as having other knock-on benefits, then I think this is one being, for example, potentially decreasing the number of economically inactive people. If people's pain goes down and people's general happiness increases, then rather than working 5 hours, they might be willing to work 10, or rather than working 10, they might be able to work 20, or whatever the number is. So we can help with the government's agenda. It's just really making sure you use the right language and getting in front of the right people. But I wouldn't expect some kind of significant change during this parliament compared to what we had last time round.
So you mentioned a few very interesting things, yeah, and I'm getting excited over here. Right. So I took some notes. Um, the first one is research. I am really, really happy to hear that there's going to be a lot more research being done. I think this is something that is severely lacking in the sector, and it's one of the main reasons why, when you look at the reluctance for the NHS to actually prescribe this medication for patients, it's because there isn't enough research for them. So, I mean, as a healthcare professional, I'm very, very aware that doctors are unlikely to do a prescription for an unlicensed medication, um, particularly one that is known for misuse. So, having this research and not anecdotal data, because at the moment, that's all we have right now is anecdotal data. I can sit here and I can scream and shout about how medical cannabis has changed my life. But the reality is, this research is needed. And a lot of healthcare professionals or scientists or anything, you're always going to look at the data. So you do need this. So it's really, really good to know that this research is actually going to be coming our way. Just on that topic, then, with the new government coming in, do you think that they will still push for this research to be done?
You mean condition-specific research?
Yeah.
I think the government, the previous government's position was that they want to reduce barriers to research happening. I mean, I think it's going to be for industry and academics to actually do that. I think obviously if the government can help fund that via their life sciences program, that would obviously be very welcome, because that's one of the challenges. It's getting that funding in place to actually do these clinical trials, and to have this evidence base that we can use to show medical cannabis's effectiveness. Obviously, there's a lot of really good real world evidence that people like Drug Science T21 program have, but the government, the previous one, was very clear about the importance of clinical trials. So we're going to keep pressing the case for real world evidence, but also they've made clear about the clinical trial data. So anything that we can do to get more trials to help more patients, is a good thing. But I think that's more up to industry and academics to deliver that, hopefully with some government funding.
Yeah, definitely. And to all the patients out there, get involved in the trials. I know that a lot of the times patients don't think that their story matters because it's not as dramatic as somebody else's story. Every single person's story matter. Get involved in the trials. The more you share about your experience, and they're usually anonymized, the more you share about your experience, the more you can actually help the next person. So let's all try and get involved. It's going to be for the success of the industry, and it's actually going to help you as well because you never know. They might introduce a medication further down the line that might give you much more effectiveness than the medication that you're getting now because now we have some real evidence. Not that anecdotal data isn't real evidence, but you know what I mean, I think. Do you? I hope so.
I mean, clearly there'll be medicines that will work better for certain conditions, and it might be the way that they're how they're dosed, the makeup of the CBD and THC and the terpenes and how that's administered, etc. So I mean, I think there's a way to go to try and figure out exactly what would be the an optimal route for a particular condition. And obviously, every individuals are different as well, and that'd be a matter for the doctor and the individuals to you know work together on that. But no, I think there's still a way to go in terms of getting that as optimal as possible.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the other things that you mentioned is, you know, with the new government, you want to be working towards linking objectives. What would you be able to give some examples of these things, like one or two?
Yeah, well, as I say, with the NHS waiting list, I mean, I think they've been at record highs. I think it's over 7 million now on waiting lists, and the new health secretary has said this is basically quoting him that the system is broken. So, I mean, Labour's been quite clear that they want to reform and improve the healthcare system. And if we assume that a high proportion of those on waiting lists will have some form of pain, because that would be very logical based on other evidence we have around the number of people with chronic pain in society. I think around up to about a third of people have chronic pain, or at least some form of significant pain. So it'd be quite reasonable to assume that if that a high number of those on the waiting list have chronic pain, and therefore cannabis can be a an opportunity to help treat them and hopefully bring them off the waiting lists in a speedily manner, rather than the 7 or 8 million remaining on there. So I think that's a tangible example. We've been doing a health economics study with Drug Science, University of York, Ethifarm, Glass Farms, and Rua Bioscience, looking at whether there'd be a cost to the NHS of prescribing medical cannabis for chronic pain. The results aren't out yet, but it's looking very promising from the data I've seen, and it should be out soon. So I mean, I think information like that will be able to help build this case with regulators more, and that's certainly what we'll be doing once the report's out.
Yeah, thank you. And I did not realize it was 7 million. That is a very, very large, disturbing number. I mean, we're in the millions here. That's actually really disturbing. You said my trigger word, NHS, broken. That's my trigger word. I'm not going to go into a whole ADHD rant about it, but anybody who watches this podcast knows how much I am so disappointed at the level of healthcare that is provided by the NHS. And it's actually really heartbreaking to hear about 7 million people on the waiting list, because that's 7 million people who are struggling and waiting to get treatment. And on top of that, these waiting lists can go on forever. So that means that person is sat there struggling and their health continues to deteriorate because they're not necessarily getting the right level of support. So yeah, I think awareness for these I wonder how we can start creating awareness for these patients because that's a lot of people that are just, oh, sorry, looks like somebody's having fun over here. That's that's a lot of people like that. I'm probably just taking this personal because I'm somebody who struggles with chronic pain, and I can just imagine the suffering that somebody is going through, especially if you're on the waiting list for specialist intervention. That means you're really struggling. And so I suppose I'm just wondering how can we actually reach out to these people so that they can start to understand that there is another way that you can actually start treating your condition. Not treating, sorry. cannabis is a symptom reliever, but at least it will enable you to start doing all of the other stuff that you can do to manage your health and have a more holistic approach to your health and well-being. You may still need to be on that waiting list, but at least you're not dying while you're on it. That's my rant. Oh, sorry, I started ranting, didn't I? Yeah, how do you think we can reach out to these 7 million people?
Well, a lot of them are probably going to be cannabis naive, looking at just the general NHS waiting list. There'd be no reason why they'd have a connection with cannabis more than anybody else or whatever. So, I mean, I think that would be a reasonable starting point to make that assumption. A lot of them will also be older as well. And, an important way to help them is obviously to raise awareness of the existence of prescription cannabis. Ideally, you'd want people that they would trust, like doctors, to feel aware and confident to talk about treatment options. It's not quite straightforward at the moment because GPs can't prescribe. If they were able to, only consultants can. Then it would make it a lot more likely that you might have information in the surgery, and doctors might actually be openly raising this as a treatment option more so than currently. But it's also around doctors feeling confident as well. And there's a good organisation in the industry called MCCS who does a lot of important work to try and raise awareness with doctors to help educate them. That's one part of it. Clearly, also, those who are naive patients may well want alternative ways to receive their medication that wouldn't be flowers. They might well want capsules or oils or whatever that might be. And I think we will see a growth in those products being available. I know companies have recently entered the market or are going to, offering those types of products. And I think that will be another route to giving doctors confidence because they're obviously their background, they're used to prescribing traditional pharmaceutical products. And it will also hopefully open up opportunities with some of the naive patients who that is more likely to be the type of medication that they would want to receive. Clearly, also that those who are aware of cannabis, they're equally as important and they need their medication as well. But that's a slightly different target audience and conversation. But I think for those on the waiting list, those are some of the ways it needs to be approached, and it's also around breaking down stigma in society, frankly, as well. We we've got a patient survey report coming out soon, and that was looking at one of the questions was looking at, well, do patients feel stigmatized? And actually, two of the main cohorts for that actually were not the public authorities, which was a surprise to me, but actually it was more so family and friends, and they were one of the groups that were actually stigmatizing people more than anybody else. So we do need to look at this and think how we can break down those barriers, how we can educate people more to not have that stigma, to understand what it can do as a medicine, and to move forward from there.
So basically, what I got out of that was we need to definitely get the GPs more involved in patients' care with regard to offering medical cannabis as a treatment option. B, we need to get more involved with charities such as Age UK that support older people, so that they can start having the awareness around the medication. And C, we need to start looking at stigmas. I mean, I think this is something that we have been doing for a very, very long time, but just definitely more of it is needed, and family and friends. And do you know what? It's funny that you say that because that's currently my experience as well. Like, and I think a lot of the people that I speak to, it's their experience. Like, fair enough, yes, at work people will say stuff and people will say stuff all over the place, but once they actually start seeing the positive changes in you, they kind of stop. Whereas your family and friends will see the positive changes in you and will still complain, and you're like, are you serious right now? Like, are you actually serious right now? So I'm actually not surprised by that statistic, basically, is what I'm trying to say. I've spoken to so many people that actually feel the same way. And one of the things that I think that we can do to improve this is, if you look at substance misuse services, they have a family and carers group where people's family and friends and stuff and carers can go there and learn more about how substances impact the person and how they can actually help their loved ones and support their loved ones. And I think something like that is needed for medical cannabis because, you're already going through a very, very difficult time. The fact that you need medication in your life means that there is something wrong here. The last thing you need then, whilst going through this very challenging time, is for people to turn around and, especially your loved ones, to turn around and criticize you for your choice of medication. So that's, I find it very appalling. And I think family and carers getting this service up and running, even having like frequently asked questions, and they can start looking at, I suppose, seeing medical cannabis from a different perspective. I think that would be really important too.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's good you raised, I think, AGK and other charities. I mean, it would certainly be very helpful if health charities out there not only provide some factual information about medical cannabis and its existence, but also actually talk about case studies of how it can help people and provide some signposting and help people make informed decisions and explain the opportunities associated with cannabis as a medicine. So I think that is more powerful than me, for example, saying it as the CEO of the Cannabis Industry Council, because people say, well, of course you would say that, Mike. This is why it's really important we do have those conversations and work with them and provide information where we can, because they will be some of the ones that can help build out that wider case and break down those barriers.
Yeah, no, definitely. And just in terms of like the future of the cannabis industry, what are your hopes? Not what is in the horizon, but what are your hopes for the future of the cannabis industry in the UK? Or maybe we should start calling it cannabis-based medical products. I think that's what they prefer to call it.
Well, look, I mean, I think in the next 5 years or so, we've got to look to reduce red tape and liberalise the prescription sector, and that means some of the things that are happening we've talked about, like making it easier to do R&D. It also means trying to make sure that supply chains are as coherent as possible, and there aren't lots of unnecessary barriers to getting medicines to patients, basically, and making it viable for them to invest and to grow their businesses, because the opportunity is there to get to patient numbers that are equivalent to somewhere like Australia, which at the moment are of the order of 8 to 10 times higher per capita, and that's obviously a huge difference. So it's about having that right regime in place, and our view is that we need to take incremental steps to improve the rules that were introduced 5 or 6 years ago. There are other things like allowing e-prescribing, for example. At the moment, scripts are sent through the post by doctors, which takes up time. Someone actually has to go and walk to the post box, and it also is less secure and safe, frankly, putting a prescription in a letterbox. It'd be much better to be doing these things digitally, and that would also mean that the data is more secure, and it actually it will go back to what we were talking about earlier, which is actually having that information on what medicine is benefiting which patient cohorts, and it'd just be a simple change just to save money for clinics and for doctors. So there's very simple things like that's something that the NHS Digital would need to enable. It's not quite as simple as just flicking a switch. There are some technical challenges they would need to overcome, but as with anything, there's always there's a will, there's a way. So we need to keep working through those issues, and if we were going to talk about consumer CBD, clearly the novel foods process has been a challenge for many businesses, and has been recently a few positive noises that products are making their way through the authorization process, but that's has hindered growth there, frankly, as well. So it is a challenge. And then if you move on to industrial hemp, we want to be in a situation where, for example, that can be a viable, commercially viable alternative to the traditional carbon-intensive products used in construction, whether that's concrete, whether that's hempcrete as an alternative to concrete, whether it's using hemp for flooring, for roofing, for walls, for interiors, um, and that needs more scale in terms of production, and it needs more investment at the moment. But that there is certainly a route to that, and hopefully once we have that infrastructure and scale in place, we can make progress. But I wouldn't be surprised if we then find ourselves facing opposition from those traditional companies in the construction sector that see hemp as a threat. I would hope that the more forward-thinking, progressive ones would see it as an opportunity and would actually start wanting to invest now and get ahead of the curve rather than trying to maintain a inefficient prehistoric way of making buildings.
Okay, you said a lot of things, so I'm sitting here going, right, where do I start? Okay, what time do we have? Okay, right. I think we got a little good 10 minutes left in us, right? So, right, for starters, yeah, there is so much fear from other sectors, right? I think I've mentioned this before, cannabis-based medical products, or just cannabis hemp in particular as well. It offers so much, and that means then that yes, it can create so many more jobs, but it can also get rid of a lot of jobs. So people are nervous, and they're always going to be very, very nervous about making that change, because as far as they're concerned, yeah, there's a lot of profit that can be lost there in different sectors, particularly in the hemp sector, if you think about it, because look at how many things you can use hemp for. I don't need half the stuff that's out here. And plus, it's safer for the environment. But I'm not going to go into a whole global warming thing. I did enough of that with Rebecca. So check out that episode. But one of the things you actually mentioned was CBD. And I actually find this one very interesting because, yes, there is an explosion of so many different CBD stuff on the market. But what's come alongside of it as well is a lot of different cannabinoids, such as HHC, THCP. I can't think of the names off the top of my head anymore. Yeah, those are the two main ones at the moment that are slipping through the net and are using this opportunity to kind of like sell their product off as a CBD hemp product, only 0.2%, when in reality it's a psychoactive substance that they're selling you, and it's causing do you know what? Endless overdoses across the globe, not just here in the UK. And then you went on to mention supply chain. That's my trigger word. The supply chain is so horrible. I don't even know where to begin. Like, that needs to change. Like, that really, really, really needs to be fixed. Because once that is fixed, people are leaving the industry because of supply chain. Imagine people getting a legal prescription, leaving a legal prescription to go out into the community, risk a 5 to 7 year prison sentence, risk be your cannabis being spiked with spice or something, solely because they're not getting a consistent supply chain. And I know things have definitely improved compared to how it was before, but at the moment, it takes me 3 weeks average just to get a prescription. And that's me putting my prescription forward early and predating that prescription. If I actually request my prescription on time, Jesus Christ, man. Uh, sorry, I know it's not your fault, like, but supply chain is my trigger word. And I will stop there.
Yeah, well, I mean, on the first point about HHC, in the UK we have the Psychoactive Substances Act, which basically says all psychoactive substances are banned unless we say they're not. And I think the ones they excluded were caffeine, alcohol, and nicotine. And so everything else is captured. So if somebody is trying to sell that, they are certainly at risk of breaking the law. So that's what I would say about that. Uh, in terms of the supply chain, I mean, obviously this is a new industry. It's obviously not a new product as a medicine. So it's still being built out. We've now thankfully got a number of UK growers at varying stages of their development as well, which has been really positive to see. And we've obviously got clinics coming into the industry as well. And there is learning to be had when it's a new industry, and making sure that the challenges get ironed out where possible. Obviously, we all want to see good customer care. We all want to see compliant products arriving on time. I think some challenges, though, obviously relate to things outside of the industry's control. Whether it's to do with customs, whether it's to do with burdensome processes. And these are things that, in reality, you reference obviously the illicit market. It's not. They don't have to follow the same processes and meet the same compliance. They have an inbuilt advantage, which, in a sense, that that their costs are lower and their compliance is lower. So that's just the reality of how it is. So I understand the comparison, why people would want to make the comparison, but it's not necessarily as straightforward, because businesses want to do right by patients. They want to make sure product is compliant and is safe, and that has to be a top priority.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I'm always going to complain about supply chain until I get my medication on time. So I will never stop complaining about that. But no, I agree with you. There is so much regulations put into place when it comes to medical cannabis, and the amount of medication that has to be destroyed, and then we have to wait for new medication to come in. So I completely understand the whole supply chain issue. It's still an issue. And I think this is an issue that the government needs to sort out, but they won't, because there's not enough patients. So going back to what you mentioned about the CBD and the HHC around people breaking the law, the problem is they are actually breaking the law already, and they seem to be getting away with it. I have no idea how, but they do. And it's bad enough that they're putting these products out there and they're making it accessible to teenagers, which is a whole safeguarding issue that I'm not even going to go into right now. That's an episode in and of itself. However, who gets blamed is the medical cannabis sector, because they're under the assumption that all of these medications are coming from you know what I mean, the medical cannabis sector. So that's where I have an issue with it, because it's like, hang on a second, you've got all these people overdosing on cannabinoids and then turning around and being like, well, see, medical cannabis, actually that's not medical cannabis. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that point. I just wanted to put that out there, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think synthetic cannabinoids sold, outside the medical space, is a completely different ballgame to, a medicine that's being prescribed by a doctor, that's being produced to specific standards and compliance mechanisms. You know, it's completely different.
So, just to sort of like round things off, then I have like two questions I'd like to ask everybody, which is, in terms of cannabis naive patients, what sort of advice or feedback would you give to them?
I would say, be open-minded, speak to doctors, speak to nurses, speak to those, if you have a particular condition, speak to those who supported you, who have that background knowledge. There are some, charities that will help specific people. So if, for example, with childhood epilepsy, there's MedCan, who, will help give support both in terms of knowledge, and they, as I understand, they provide funding from time to time as well. So, and then there are others as well who also help. So it's about speaking to that knowledgeable support network, and understanding that, by way of simple comparison, a lot of people are being prescribed opioids and benzodiazepines, and these are fundamentally much more harmful than prescription cannabis, in terms of how you're feeling as an individual, in terms of what it will actually ultimately likely achieve as well. And somehow it's been normalised in society that prescribing opiates is absolutely fine. That's something which much less harmful and arguably achieves a lot more for the individual patient is has more stigma. But that's something that we've got to break down. But it's speaking to those people and just having that open mindedness to understand that there's alternatives out there to things like opiates, which maybe will be a much better option for you.
Yeah, and I'm realizing I have a lot of trigger words, man. So I'm a very angry person. Opiates is another one of my trigger words. So only because it's so normalized, I don't understand. Like, how can people have absolutely no problem at all prescribing you copious amounts of opiates, and then I take zero. Can't see the grams, but I take a tiny bit of cannabis, and it's like, oh, why are you taking that for? You shouldn't be taking that for. Oh, it's gonna make you high. Have you ever been high on opiates before? Because I can tell you, I'll take one tramadol pill, and I don't even know what happens in the next 5 hours following that. It's just you're just there, and then you're like, oh, the day just went by. I wonder what happened. Because you're completely spaced out of it, and yet somehow this is a more appropriate medication than the little bit of medication that I take now, that I'm still compos mentis. Like, I still have my faculties. When I take opiates, I don't even know what planet I'm on. I'm in another dimension. I'm in Kepler. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think these are. It's been ingrained into society over a number of years. This is obviously one challenge where it's really hard to explain how we've got to this point, but it's true in respect to opioids. And also on the other hand, there's alcohol is obviously something which is consumed by many millions of people in the country, most of whom wouldn't even recognise it as being a drug. They would think of it as being something entirely different, and that viewpoint is to me is completely illogical. We should be discussing the harms of drugs, and of which alcohol is one. And on the medicine side, as we've talked about, and we've got to a place where society is of the view that arguably the most harmful um, drug, albeit in this case it's being used as a medicine, is considered much more appropriate option than prescription cannabis, which is far safer and I think individuals. I mean, you've obviously explained how you feel about it, Berta. So I mean, the evidence is there.
And you know what? I'm gonna go now, but I'm getting excited again. Okay, we need to wrap it up. But you just mentioned something that's very important, which is alcohol, right? And I just really want to quickly touch on that because that's a really, really good point there. A lot of people forget that alcohol is a drug. It's a drug, and you know what the worst drug in the world is? Alcohol. Go look it up. It kills more people than heroin and cocaine combined every year. And it's the only drug, not the only drug, but one of the very few drugs that withdrawal symptoms are actually fatal. You don't Anyways, I just wanted to put that out there. So moving on to my last question before I go on another rant. What what sort of feedback would you give to the, I suppose, medical cannabis industry in the UK?
Um, I would say keep fighting the good fight. What I mean by that is we need to stay unified. We need to address the challenges, whether it's policy or regulatory, together. We need to obviously push together to see that progress. They obviously need to be focused on making sure that compliant product is arriving with patients in an orderly way. And I think every business will want to achieve that. So yeah, it's about collaboration. It's about engagement with patients and stakeholders. It's about working together in the interests of the industry so that we have a united voice that when we go and speak to regulators and MPs and government, that it's very clear what we stand for and that we all are pushing forward in the same way. So I mean, it's still a fairly nascent industry, but I mean, I think the signs are that we are going in the right direction, and people are pulling together, and I think just more of that will help everybody.
Okay. I think that that is a very good place to end it on. Mike, thank you very much for coming down here today and having a chat with us. We really appreciate your insight here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
No worries. I look forward to seeing everybody next week. If you're interested in any more work that the Cannabis Industry Council is doing or some of the projects that they're pushing forward, all of the links will be in the description section of this video. Thank you, everyone. Bye.